Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be going over how to get a dark and moody look using a photo I took in downtown Toronto. I've provided the photo as a DNG file down below for you to download and follow along. This is the photo that we'll be editing today. It was shot on the Sony A7 IV with the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 lens. This shot in particular was shot at ISO 100 f10 and a 2-second exposure. Before we start, you'll notice my development panel might look different than yours. If you'd like to set it up like mine, or something that suits your workflow better, what you can do is just right-click on any of the panels and hit Customize Development Panel, and you'll be able to move these around and organize them whichever way suits best for you. The first step is going to be to fix the optical flaws. So I'll go under Lens Corrections and enable Remove Chromatic Aberrations and enable Profile Corrections. This will also get rid of some of the vignetting in the corners. Here under Lens Profile, it already has my lens selected. If yours doesn't show up automatically, you might have to go in manually and select the lens you're using. Next, we're going to crop our image. I'm going to go for a 16:9. I just like the cinematic look that this aspect ratio gives. I want to leave enough room above some of these buildings so that when I straighten out the image, they're not cut off. So we'll start about there, and I'm going to use the angle tool to straighten up the image. I'm going to use the CN Tower as my reference for this, and I'm going to go about -126. And close that. Going down to the Transform tab, I'm going to use the vertical slider to straighten out these buildings. I don't want them to look like they're leaning away or towards me. In this case, I'm going to shift it in the negative to about -15, and I'll enable Constrain Crop. Now this here looks straight and the buildings look more upright. Now that my image is cropped and straightened, I'm going to head to the Basic tab and I'm going to adjust the white balance. So we have the temp slider and the tint slider. The temp slider will go from blue to yellow, where the tint slider will go from green to magenta. I'm going to shift this to the colder side, just adjusting it to 5600. And I'll just adjust the tint slider slightly to about -10. Before adjusting the exposure slider, I like to set the whites and blacks just to define my darkest and brightest points. For the whites, I'm going to bring them up to about +40. And if you hold Option and do this, you can see if you're starting to clip. I'm going to set this, like I said, to 40, and the blacks I'm going to shift down to about -5. Next, for the highlights, I'm going to bring them down to -50, and the shadows I'll bump up just a little bit to +15. To start off the dark and moody look, I'm going to bring down my exposure to about -60. How much you bring this down will depend on how you exposed your image in camera. So if it was overexposed, you might even have to bring it down 2 stops. For the contrast, I'm going to bump it up slightly, just to +5, because we're going to increase the contrast using the tone curve after. I'm going to bring up the clarity just slightly to +10 and the dehaze to about +20. And I'm not really going to touch the vibrance and saturation in this instance. We're going to close the Basic tab for now and open up the Tone Curve panel. We're going to make a slight S-curve and increase the contrast. This end will represent your highlights, and this will represent your shadows, having midtones in the middle. So we're going to increase the highlights to about +10. We're going to bring up the lights to +5. The darks will bring down to -5, and the shadows will decrease to -10. And if you just click the eye icon, you can see the changes you've made in that particular panel. Okay, so we're going to close up the Tone Curve tab and we're going to go down to the Color Mixer tab. And we're going to start by desaturating all of the colors. The HSL sliders will allow you to adjust all of the colors that are already existing in your photo. And I'm just going to start by adding some of them in. For the reds, I'm going to go about -70. The oranges I'll bring up to -30 here. The yellows I'll bring up to about -20. And the blues I'll bring up to about -15. And going down to the luminance, I'm going to shift the oranges to about -20 to the darker side, and the blues to about -15. Now that we've adjusted all the colors that are already existing, we're going to close the color mixer tab and open the color grading tab. This will allow us to add new color tints into either the midtone, shadows, and highlights. Starting off, I'm going to go into the shadows and cool them off by going to about 235, holding shift and adding about +10 saturation. And then I'm going to decrease the luminance to -5. Going over to the highlights, I'm going to actually go in the opposite direction to more orange. So go 35, hold shift, and increase this to +10 as well, and decrease the luminance to -5. Because we already had a bluish sky, adding orange will kind of give it that gray color. Next, we're going to open the detail panel, and we're going to add some sharpening to the image. I don't want this applied to the sky. I mainly just want it applied to the buildings and the foreground here. So I'll hold Option, and I'm going to mask out this sky. So I'll bring this to +80. And then I'll be able to zoom in and hold Option again and just increase this to +70. Then I'm going to open the effects panel, and I'm going to add just a little bit of vignetting, just about -10. And I'll increase the highlight slider all the way, and that will allow the bright parts of the sky to come through that vignette. And lastly, to really dial in the moody look, we're going to add some masks, and this will allow us to make adjustments to specific parts of the image. So we're going to start with a linear gradient on the bottom. Just click and drag up just about 1/4 of the way, and we're going to decrease this about half a stop to about -50. And because I don't want to lose too much of the train, I'm going to add another mask. This time it will be a radial gradient, and we'll make this more of an oval shape just so it's covering the train. And I'm going to increase the exposure to +15, and I'm just going to raise the shadows up just a little bit to +20. I'm going to add another linear gradient to this side and decrease the exposure to the same as the bottom, about half a stop. And I see the light is coming more from this corner, and I want to emphasize that. So I'll add a radial gradient here, and I'll make it more on this building here. And what I want to do is actually shift the dehaze in the negative to add almost like a fog. And I'll shift this to -30. And I'm just going to increase the exposure slightly. And for the very last mask, we're going to create a radial gradient around the CN Tower, quite large, and make sure it's feathered all the way out. And I'm just going to increase the exposure to +30 and the whites to +20. This is the final image. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Subscribe if you aren't already, and I'll see you in the next one.